I had quite a few questions about this coffee pot analogy, how CEC relates to exchange and residual acidity. So I realize a lot of you guys don't drink coffee in general or out of these type of dispensers or urns. But essentially, when we look at this first urn, we can think of the larger reserve pot as the residual acidity. Sometimes it's also called reserve acidity. See as residual here, reserve here, same. Active acidity or exchange acidity, we can think of it in this small vertical pipe. Notice how they're all connected, however. In this small infographic in the bottom here, the same thing can be depicted by this active acidity out in the soil solution, and then reserve acidity bound to those clay and humus particles. So if you imagine these clay and humus particles being able to attract or hold on to H plus ions, the more of these, the more H plus ions. That's where we get CEC involved. So higher CEC soils are inherently going to have more clay and humus. The pot's going to be larger. Sandy soils or low CEC soils, like what we're using in the greenhouse, that pot's going to be a lot smaller. So any action you take against that acidity is going to have a harder time recovering, meaning a lower buffer action. So kind of have a steady state here. We're starting the action of removing this acidity from this smaller vertical pipe. You might think of that as like you limed the soil or otherwise interacted with that acidity, drew it down pretty significantly in regard to kind of thinking about this as like an axis of pH. So you lower the acidity. Once you turn the spigot off, or you stop liming or stop interacting with that acidity, it'll find some new level. If you could imagine taking the same amount of, in this case, coffee or active acidity out of this larger pot as the smaller pot will move much further in comparison to the larger pot. So we would say that sandy soils or low CEC soils have a lower buffering action or power as opposed to high CEC soils. So really, the action of removing a cup of coffee, you can think of as reducing the acidity in the soil solution or removing acidity from the soil solution, generally by some sort of process like liming.